That's how I got my nickname, and that's why the book is called The Show Must Go On by Mark Money Green. A legend of being someone partially responsible for hip hop. You know, back in the day, and I'll tell a story real quick, you know, when I was DJing and rapping, I went to college and I was telling people about it, nobody believed me, so I never talked about it anymore. So one day I'm online, I'm reading a story with Master G, and he mentioned my name. And from that point on, he started mentioning my name in a lot of different interviews. And it really gave me an opportunity to sit down and really tell my story, because I'm pretty laid back and I don't really brag or boast about anything I've done, but I've done a lot. So this was kind of an introduction for me to kind of get out here and tell my story. So with that being said, I will start my story not all the way from the beginning, but I'm gonna start it from the time that I first met and was being introduced to hip hop. So I'd say around 1976, I had a band, and we used to play all around town. And I'm from New Jersey. I'm from Hackensack, New Jersey, 4 miles from Harlem, 9 miles from the Bronx. And you know, we played all around town, and we did little cocktail sips and weddings and stuff like that. And by 1976, all the bands started fading out because this new era of music called disco started coming in. And during that time, there were DJs, and the DJs seemed to be more bigger and better than the bands. So during that time when my band broke up, I decided to take my equipment, and I had 2 turntables. I went down in my basement and just started practicing mixing. Now, there's a lot of history that you guys don't know, because back in the day, when we had mixers, you didn't have a crossfader where you could hear both beats at the same time. You could only hear one turntable, and the other one you had to kind of step your feet until you got the beat, and then you mixed it that way. So that was one thing I was able to master. And eventually I'm playing at a club, well, not a club, actually a rec center in Inglewood, New Jersey. This promoter came up to me and he asked me, did I want to be in the battle of the big DJs in the Bronx? I said, sure. Now I was in 11th grade, this was 1977. So I go to the Bronx, I'm up first, I'm doing my mix, I'm playing, and about 75 people around watching me. Next thing I know, this other crew started DJing. And everybody left me. I probably had about 15 people there. And I was like, what is going on over there? Because I saw 2 guys on the mic and I heard people saying something. So I hurried up and packed up my stuff and ran over there. And that was the first time I heard rapping. I was like, wow, what is this? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And before I could even get excited about that, another crew went on, about 4 people. So that night I went home. I don't even think I slept. I went home, wrote my first rap. And that weekend I became ghetto famous in the neighborhood. I was there in Hackensack at the rec center, and I'm DJing and I'm rapping, and people were going crazy because they had never heard this. And it was like, at the end, girls would come in, Mark, what's that song you were singing? Sing that song, let me hear that poem. And at this time, my high school friend, which was Guy O'Brien, he was a freshman, I was a junior, he used to follow me around when I was DJing. He came up to me and said, Mark, what is that you're doing? I said, well, they call me to rap. He said, man. So he started following me around. So by 78, I went to college. He called me up and he said, listen, man, we're getting ready to make a record. I said, what do you mean we're making a record? Because at this point, he started DJing. So the next thing I know, he said, yeah, we're making a record off of Good Times. Now, anybody ever know, or any guys about my age, Good Times was the record that everybody used to mix with. So he said, we're making this record. The next thing I know, he called me up, and he said, we got a record out, it's called Rapper's Delight. He was called Master G, and the group was called Sugar Hill Gang. That was my first introduction to hip hop. So from that point on, I went to school, I was in college, I was DJing. Eventually my equipment got robbed. I got robbed, my equipment got stolen, and it took all my records, everything. So that kind of ended my DJ career. Now most of you probably don't even know what this is. How many people know what this is? Raise your hand. Tell them what it is, my brother.
That's the adapter for 45.
45, these were the little records before you had the big records. We had 45s, we put the adapter on, right? You know, so back then, again, there was just a lot of things that you guys don't really know that really happened. And hip hop was a whole different ball game. So by the time I got out of school, I got a job with Moore, and I was working with her, with an artist named Lilo Thomas, and then there was this rap group that came out called the Boogie Boys. Now, some of you may not know who the Boogie Boys are. They had a song called Fly Girl. So during this time, this was 1984, 1985, I was managing the Boogie Boys, and back then, it was a whole different ball game because hip hop was still new to everybody. It was only basically known in the tri-state area. I'm talking about New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. As we started moving out to different states, nobody really knew what we were doing, but they loved it. You know, once that Rapper's Delight record came out, everybody wanted to hear hip hop. So by 1985, we got on this tour called the Swatch Watch Tour with the Fat Boys, which later turned into the Fresh Fest, which was the first major hip hop tour. And during that time on that tour, we had Curtis Blow, there was the Fat Boys, Houdini, people who made, I can't even think. Oh, there's a bunch of people, all right? So we had that tour. Now, some of the crazy things that happened back then is like, we used to always do roller skating rings and clubs. We never really did big theaters. We even did a barn one time. We were in Ohio. I think it was somewhere like Dayton, Ohio. And we pulled up in one of those yellow school buses. And we go all the way back, and we go back, and there's this big barn in the back. And it made a stage inside the barn, and we actually played in the barn. Can you believe that? But one thing I want to say is that people don't realize how hip hop really started. Now, back in the day, we got paid after the show. Now, if you know anything about music now, everybody wants their money before the show. The deposits come in, the artists want the money as soon as you get it. Back then, we got paid after the show. Now, the only problem was we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have beepers, and the only phone you had was if you had 10 cents, you could put 10 cents in the phone booth to make a phone call. Now, most of the promoters back then, I call them Yankee promoters because they were all drug dealers, pushers, con artists, hustlers, street guys. You didn't have no real legit promoters back then. So what they would do, they would actually come in, they would pay the opening act and the headliner, and then they would disappear. So everybody else got caught holding the empty bag. So I kind of peeped this whole thing out, and I said, you know what, from now on, we're going to be the opening act. And the reason being, I wanted to make sure I got my money. Because a lot of shows we were doing, people just weren't getting paid. And you couldn't find a promoter. You didn't have a cell phone. You didn't have a beeper. You had what? A payphone. So you didn't even know where or any place he would be. So eventually, we started doing these shows, and I became the opening act. And I'll tell you this funny story how I got my name, Mark Money Green, was that one day I was with the Boogie Boys, and I told them, never go on the stage until I tell you I have the money. When I tell you I have the money, you go on the stage. Finally, one day they went on stage before I told them I had the money, and I came back, I started cursing, yelling, screaming at them. And before you know it, Romeo J.D. just yelled out, all right, Mark Money Green. And from that point on, that's how I got my nickname, and that's why the book is called The Show Must Go On by Mark Money Green.